Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Brenner, Senior Vice President of Audience Content Strategy at Cyber Risk Alliance, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this SE Media In Focus episode sponsored by Fortinet. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Derek Manky, Chief Security Strategist and Global VP of Threat Intelligence for FortiGuard Labs. Let's dig right in, Derek. First of
Good.
all, hi, good to see you again.
Hello again. Yeah, it's always great to talk with you, Bill.
So, Fortinet has a new threat report.
Mhm.
Why don't we start just with, I have some questions that I'll be asking, but why don't we start with what you see as just the key takeaways?
Sure. So key takeaways would be that we look at a lot of data on a daily basis. This is a 6-month report we do biannually. My ultimate takeaway from this is there's a lot of good news. We always talk about the bad news, right? There's a lot of good news in here. There's management strategies. There's ways that we can actively mitigate a lot of this risk. So it doesn't have to be daunting. I think that's the highest level takeaway. But there's a lot of big picture trends also within the report that we're observing, of course, that we need to be aware of.
Such as?
Yeah, so if I look at the trends, first of all, one, I would say the biggest thing to be aware of is the targeted nature of attacks now. We've talked about this before, but we have even more data packed into the report to support this. The first thing would be on the APT groups themselves. I think we've talked before about APT groups and cybercrime groups kind of converging, and the targets are becoming similar. The methodologies are becoming similar. If we look at the APT groups themselves, we had a feature in the report that shows that they're quite active. We really haven't looked at this in detail before in terms of activity, movement of groups, but we looked at all known groups, 138 of them, and almost 1/3 of those we saw activity with in the first half of this year. That's 41 out of 138 of those groups. That, to me, that's a big number. Keep in mind, these groups are usually on a 2-year cycle, right? Going to the drawing board, the war room, looking at their targets, and how to act. So that was one of the things. The other thing, Bill, is we actually took going back to that targeted trend, we looked at for the first time, a 5-year benchmark. So we looked way back in time, 5 years ago from our data, same period compared to this half of this year. And we saw a couple of things that were not surprising. So malware, as an example, exploded. Not surprising to me, but it's the reality. We just see so much volume out there. There's 135% growth in families of new types of malware, 175% on variants. So a lot of automation at play, to create that noise. But what was more interesting was on the exploitation front. So we looked at active exploits, unique exploits. So unique proof of concept codes that's been weaponized into exploits. We saw over 10,000 of those, right? So that's a 68% growth compared to 5 years ago. There's just more tools in the toolkit now. But what was interesting is we actually saw a 75% drop in the amount of organizations that are being targeted by those unique toolkits or exploits. So more tools, more selective, essentially. So again, it's more of that targeted theme. And the last thing, Bill, I would say for the takeaway or the big picture is on the botnets. We're seeing botnets, so basically infrastructure, malicious infrastructure, becoming more resilient now. On average, from when we detected pings, so botnet command and control pings, to when they ceased, so basically when they've been cleaned up and dismantled, on average, it's 83 days. That's the number we analyze in the report, which to me is not good enough. The industry needs to get better at that. But there's also 27% more botnets in terms of growth. So we have more infrastructure, more operators, and more resiliency too.
So thank you for that. So that covers the what quite well. Now let's get into the why. Why do you think we see such volatility in ransomware from year to year. It seems like, and I'll go back 5 years when people were getting fatigued talking about ransomware then, but it just keeps on forcing itself onto everybody's front burner. Talk about that.
Yeah, I would. It's
Particularly the attacks becoming more targeted part.
Yeah. So first of all, the volatility. This is, to me, a formula of the variants we talked about. So more malware growth. We've reported on more ransomware variants, which ties to ransom as a service. When you have ransom as a service, you have affiliates, you have more people, not just one monolithic campaign. When you have more people, people are on different schedules. We actually see a traditional drop in ransomware activity around this time of year, every summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And again, it's tied to people's schedules. They run their own campaigns, more campaigns, and you can really see these waves in attacks. So that contributes to the volatility quite a bit. In terms of the the targeted nature, I would say it's because of their success, unfortunately. What I mean by that is because they've enjoyed success in the past, profiting through ransomware, they've become more bold, they've become more mature criminal enterprise, and they've adopted new playbooks. And those new playbooks are more selective because they're going after bigger targets, which can generate more profit to them. So I'm talking about operational technology specifically. That's what we're seeing with these targeted ransom attacks, right? Less volume when it comes to OT targets, bigger payday to them. And that's essentially what we're seeing is the adoption of playbook.
Got it. So with the explosion of unique exploits and malware, how's Fortinet's FortiGuard Labs and the Global Threat Landscape Report, how are these designed to help security teams prioritize their defenses?
Yeah, so this is the good news I was talking about, Bill. We have some new views in this report. One, a continued view of a new modeling that we've had featured before in the report, but we continue to build. So it's called the red zone. What the red zone looks at is, I like to explain this in 3 buckets. You have your total attack surface, which is everything we know about all the different vulnerabilities that are out there. Over 200,000 in the world. It's a lot. And again, from a prioritize your defense perspective, you can't say, okay, I want you to make sure you're protecting against 200,000 vulnerabilities. That's right. No one has that in their patch management strategy. So we then look at the active attack surface, right? And what the active attack surface is, in your organization, what vulnerabilities do you have? Are they patched? And then out of those, what are actually being attacked by attackers, right? And when you really look, it's a funnel, right? When you start looking at that and breaking it down, that's much less. In fact, on average, that's 8.3% of all the vulnerabilities. So now we're not talking about 100% of 200,000 vulnerabilities. It's a manageable number. It's about 1,500 total of these hot vulnerabilities we're seeing going after open vulnerabilities. So it's a much different discussion for IT security teams, for patch management, for making sure you have IPS protection for the signatures. The good news is we showed this in the last report, and it actually dropped from 8.9%, that active attack surface, to 8.3. And keep in mind, that's actually shrinking, right? When that number drops, that active attack surface is shrinking. So that's one of the tools that we've developed in there. The other, and this is a brand new view, is EPSS. And this is what EPSS is an exploit prediction and scoring system. So most people are familiar with CVSS, right? The severity of a vulnerability. EPSS, in fact, is coming from another special interest group. It's gaining a lot of traction in the industry, and it's more of a dynamic score. So it looks at probability. It has much more factors built into it, saying, based off of all these factors, what are the chances of this becoming a hot vulnerability and when? And so we looked at that. We actually analyzed 11,000 vulnerabilities. And what we found this number that we came out as a takeaway was the top 1% of those 11,000. So the very severe, think CVS has 9.7 plus around that range, are 327% times more likely to be attacked and exploited within 7 days or 1 week. So it's a small number again that when these come out, you have to be aware I'm likely to be hit with this within 7 days. And again, that goes back into that patch management strategy.
Now, before I ask the next question, I'm going to backtrack a little because I should have done this at the beginning. I just want to make sure that the audience is clear on the methodology of this report. So let's talk a little bit about that. We're talking, this is among the base of everybody using your technology, the customer base. Any other elements to paint the fuller picture?
Yeah, so we have at the core of our intelligence, we have our native telemetry. So we do look at our fabric and deployed infrastructure where customers participate. So we're able to track that. But we also, it's not just that, that's the core, but we also have honeypot data. We have partnerships such as Cyber Threat Alliance. We have correlation sets that we can do. EPSS is another one that I mentioned. That's also another data set with those scores that we can correlate back to our own views. So what we work off our native intelligence, which is a lot, right? We have over 10.5 million firewalls shipped worldwide, and we have a majority of those customers subscribed and participating to that as well too. So it's a very active network. And the cool thing about that is because of the position of our intelligence, we're able to see what I call most of the threat spectrum. So end to end, right? Everything from endpoint up to sandbox, up to EDR, NDR, network detection response, up to dark web data and reconnaissance, all the way to cloud as well. So it's sort of that ecosystem of intelligence.
Got it. Thanks for that. So another hot topic I noticed is the public-private partnerships, sharing intelligence across the industry. What are you seeing and what is Fortinet doing in this area? And how do you see all of this impacting the industry as a whole?
Yeah, great question. This is, so what am I seeing? I'm seeing more consensus and desire for organizations to work together between private to private sector, but public and private as well too. I see those programs getting better. Traditionally, they've been unidirectional, one-way streets, no feedback. You can't really have a good partnership that way. So they're starting to become more give and take and bi-directional and putting skin in the game. So not pay-to-play logos that you put up into an organization. That's what I'm seeing. And what Fortinet is doing, we've actually been involved in this for over a decade, right? So we've been working with private sector. We launched the Cyber Threat Alliance as an example. That's an ecosystem within the private sector, but there's public sector contributing allies in there. We are trying to really make an impact in the industry as a whole. So going back to Cyber Threat Alliance, though, we changed the game, I would say, in my point of view, 3-4 years ago in the industry with an early share program. So within all members of the Cyber Threat Alliance, when a breaking attack is happening, that intelligence, the indicators of compromise, research, blog notes, etc., things are shared, trusted early in the organization within the CTA. I mean, before anything goes public. Why do we do that? So everybody can be prepared out of the gates. Before that, it was scrambling, right? Someone goes out publicly with intelligence, other organizations are not prepared for it. Hey, you didn't give me a heads up. How can I, it gives the attacker an advantage that way. So that's one thing we've been doing to make an impact. It's called an early share program. We've done over 845 of those within the CTA. That's quite significant. Another one is with the World Economic Forum. We've launched the Cybercrime Atlas Initiative. So this is public, private sector, law enforcement, policy, security experts in the private sector, where we're looking at we're looking at how we can build a map of the ecosystem. When I say ecosystem, the cyber criminal ecosystem, so that we can strategically disrupt it. The problem, so I talk about all the goodwill to do things. If you're not strategic about it, you don't have all the right stakeholders, and you don't do it in a coordinated fashion, you're not going to have the best result possible. So I mentioned the botnet resiliency. That's a good example of that in my mind. We have botnets we still detect that are 10 years old. They've been operating still. There's been takedown attempts, some takedown attempts, and those are all great. But ultimately, sometimes we talk about that whack-a-mole game, right? Where there's some infrastructure that comes back online, people that are still out there at large, and so forth. So this is another impact that we're trying to do, is to be just like the Cyber Threat Alliance and on the early share program, we're trying to be more coordinated within Cybercrime Atlas to have all the strategic plan and do coordinated, disruption, takedown attempts. And disruption is not just about takedown. It's not just about arresting people. It's not just about mitigating attacks. It's all of the above, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is more holistic approach together. And the impact is that makes the lives of cyber criminals much more miserable. That's what we're trying to do, create friction.
So we've really covered what's in the current aperture. So let's talk about the future. So we know what this report is showing for the here and now. What do you see? Maybe it's all, you expect to see it all being the same as the current picture. Maybe you expect some trends to shift. What are you looking to or looking at over the next 6 months, let's say?
Yeah, 6 months. Well, we're already
as potential trends.
Yeah, I would say so things that are not a surprise, that's just the reality in a formula. The things we talked about, like the volume of malware increasing, we're just going to see more volume out there. We're going to see more security holes, those vulnerabilities. I think there's almost 17,000 already this year reported. That's already by far on record pace. So that's, again, not a surprise to me, but it's a benchmark. It's something that is just a reality I think we have to deal with. But again, that when it comes to looking at the next 6 months, so basically our next report when we issue it, looking at things like that red zone, the actual manageability of that attack surface, we seem to be in that sweet spot of that 8% rate, that 8% range. I expect that to continue. I do expect to see more attacks on the operational technology, specifically on extortion. I think that's really where those playbooks are headed. So I expect to see the playbooks tweaked more from data to going after services. And the other thing is malware custom written, right? Again, if we look at the malware families and variants, a lot of the malware is, I wouldn't say generic, but Windows driven, right? That's been the reality. We do see some Linux ones, of course, too. But what we've observed lately, and I with the operational technology focus, is that attacks used to springboard from IT to OT networks. So they'd get into a Windows system and then move from there. We're starting to see more malware that's capable of operating directly within OT environments. So I expect to see more, more of that custom malware being developed. That goes with the targeted attacks too.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you for that. I think that takes us to the end of this episode. Another great discussion, Derek. Always great to talk to you. I also want to thank Fortinet for sponsoring this episode, and thanks to everyone in the audience for coming to check this out.
Always great talking with you, Bill.
Until next time.